On a foggy October night in 1993, a sheriff's cruiser was found parked on the shoulder of County Road 19 in rural Oregon. The engine was still running. The headlights were on. And in the back seat, a 6-year-old boy lay asleep, unharmed. But both front doors were wide open, and his parents, Deputy Mark Teller and Detective Erin Teller, were gone. 31 years later, during a land survey at a decommissioned fallout shelter buried beneath private property, a rusted badge is discovered under layers of concrete dust, and what's found beside it reopens one of the state's most haunting unsolved disappearances. Before we begin, hit that subscribe button if you love slow-burn psychological thrillers, long-buried clues, and true crime stories that unravel one disturbing layer at a time. October 17th, 1993. Location: Tillamook County, Oregon. The cruiser idled quietly in the darkness, its headlights cutting a pale path through the coastal fog that had rolled in off the Pacific just after sundown. It was parked on the gravel shoulder of County Road 19, a desolate stretch winding through thick pine forest with no homes for miles. The engine hummed steadily. The driver's side door hung open. So did the passengers. Inside, in the rear seat, 6-year-old Ben Teller lay curled beneath a gray sheriff's department blanket. He was barefoot, dressed in fire truck pajamas, and still half asleep when the first headlights approached. The farmer who stopped thought it was a trap at first, maybe a busted cop car rigged by poachers. But when he crept closer with his flashlight and saw the sleeping boy inside, everything changed. There was no blood, no sign of a struggle, no radio call, no indication that either Deputy Mark Teller or his wife, Detective Erin Teller, had ever left the vehicle under duress. The cruiser's dash cam had stopped recording at 10:42 p.m. A strip of magnetic tape inside the cassette cartridge was torn and mangled, as if someone had yanked it free mid-recording. The backseat camera, which should have captured everything from the vehicle's interior, had been manually shut off. Erin's service weapon was gone. Mark's sidearm was still holstered. No tire tracks led away. No footprints were found in the dewy roadside grass. And when the local sheriff arrived minutes later, his breath fogging in the cold night air, he peered into the cruiser, leaned in slowly, and murmured to himself, "What the hell were you two chasing out here?" Ben wouldn't remember much about that night. Not the fog, not the lights, not even the voices calling his name. But 3 things would stay with him, always. The smell of his mother's shampoo on the passenger seat. The faint sound of his father's voice saying, "Don't move, okay? We'll be right back." And the moment, just before falling asleep, when he noticed something strange in the rear-view mirror. Someone standing in the road behind the cruiser. Not his parents. Someone else, just standing there, watching, then gone. 31 years later, the cruiser is long retired. The boy now a man. But when a land survey crew uncovers a sealed fallout shelter on the outskirts of Tillamook, buried beneath 40 tons of earth, something is found wedged inside the rusted drain grate, a tarnished sheriff's badge belonging to Mark Teller, and beside it, a photograph of Benjamin taken after the night his parents vanished. The October wind had turned cruel by morning. It swept down through the pine canopy and rolled over the western Oregon hills like an old memory that wouldn't stay buried. Deputy Mason Coyle zipped his windbreaker higher against the cold as he stepped past the rusted survey marker and followed the flagged path toward the cratered hillside. The land had once belonged to the Bureau of Civil Defense, abandoned in the mid-1960s, and later sold off to private hands. It sat just outside Tillamook city limits, forgotten by most. But today, a backhoe operator named Leo Strickland had called in something strange, something buried, something metal and sealed. Coyle crested the ridge and found the man already pacing beside the cracked concrete slab, a bundle of caution tape balled up in his hands. He was pale, sweating, his gloves streaked with dirt and rust. It's a fallout shelter, Leo said, barely waiting for Coyle to ask. One of the old ones. Wasn't on any of the site maps. I wasn't even digging here. I was testing runoff lines and the ground just collapsed. Coyle approached the opening slowly. The slab had split clean down the center, revealing the top edge of a rusted steel hatch. It was partially caved in, but still intact. Beside it lay a bent section of rebar and several concrete fragments, most of them jagged, some spattered with what looked like aged paint. Or something worse. Coyle crouched at the edge, his flashlight cutting through the dark void below. The air that came out smelled ancient, earthy, metallic, thick with dust and rot. The beam landed on rusted shelving, a broken cot, peeling civil defense posters flaking off the walls. And there, wedged beneath a corroded floor drain, something caught the light. He reached for the radio on his shoulder. "Dispatch, this is Deputy Coyle. I need a forensics team and cold case unit at my location as soon as possible. We've got something down here." Ben Teller was teaching a criminology elective at Portland State when he got the call. He almost didn't answer. The number was local but unfamiliar, and he was already late for office hours. But something made him stop in the hallway and swipe to accept. "Mr. Teller?" the voice asked. "This is Lieutenant Sarah Canby with Tillamook County Sheriff's Office. I'm calling in reference to your parents, Mark and Erin Teller." Ben stopped walking. He hadn't heard their names spoken together like that in over a decade. "Go on," he said, the words dry in his throat. "There's been a discovery. A structure was uncovered on private property outside the city, a fallout shelter. Inside, we recovered a badge, registered to your father, and something else you'll want to see in person. I understand you're not local, but—" "I'll be there in 2 hours," Ben said. The drive south was silent, but his mind screamed the whole way. He hadn't seen that stretch of road in years. He avoided it like most people avoided accident scenes, out of trauma, superstition, or both. But as soon as he crossed the county line and the pines began to close in, the memories returned like floodwaters. The way the cruiser had looked that night, idling on the side of the road, doors open to the dark. The way the sheriff had stood with a hand on his gun, whispering that something wasn't right, and the way no one had ever found a trace of them. Ben parked where the patrol cars were clustered along the ridge. His stomach twisted when he saw the yellow tape and the coroner's van parked quietly off to the side. A young officer met him near the tree line and led him down the narrow path. "Lieutenant Canby's waiting for you inside the staging tent," she said. "We've secured the shelter and cataloged what we could. You're not obligated to ID anything formally, but there's something you should see." Ben nodded. The tent smelled like latex gloves and damp plastic. Inside, Lieutenant Canby stood beside a folding table covered in tagged evidence bags. She was tall, lean, no nonsense. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. "We found this wedged beneath a rusted grate in the shelter's northwest corner," she said, lifting a clear evidence pouch. Inside was a tarnished silver badge, dulled with age but still legible. "Tillamook, County Sheriff Number 712, M. Teller." Ben's knees nearly gave out. "My father never took that badge off," he said. "Not even off duty." "There's more," Canby said gently. She picked up a second evidence pouch. Inside this one was a photograph, a Polaroid, old and curling at the edges. It showed a young boy standing in a kitchen. The wallpaper behind him was yellow with green flowers. A birthday cake sat on the counter. The boy had a party hat on. He looked surprised, caught mid-blink. Ben stared at it for a long time before whispering, "That's me. That's my 6th birthday." That photo was taken the week they disappeared. It was never developed. The film was still in the camera. Canby exchanged a glance with the crime tech behind her. "You're sure?" "I've never seen that photo before," Ben said. "But I remember that day. I remember that exact cake. My dad baked it. The oven broke, so he used the fire pit outside. He said it was the first and last time he'd ever try cowboy baking. "Mr. Teller?" Canby hesitated. "We think the shelter was accessed sometime after the year 2000. Maybe multiple times. The soil analysis suggests recent disturbance." Ben looked up sharply. "You think someone's been using it?" "We don't know yet. But the badge was placed, not dropped. We also found food wrappers from the early 2000s, a child sneaker that looks about 20 years old, and a journal. We're still processing it." Ben's voice was tight. "A journal?" Canby nodded. "You're not allowed to read it until we finish the chain of custody report. But from the initial page, it appears to be written by someone named Erin." Ben froze. His mother. Alive. Or at least, she had been. Long after 1993. He took a slow, trembling breath, then looked back at the badge on the table. It had taken 31 years to surface. Now the floodgates were opening. The photo haunted him. Ben stared at it again as he sat in the hotel room that night, the plastic evidence pouch still sealed. His fingertips traced the curled corners of the Polaroid through the thin layer of plastic as if touching it could pull him back in time. The wallpaper was right. The mismatched plates. The sag in the cabinet door from where the hinges had always squeaked. And that cake, burnt around the edges, slanted to one side, frosting sliding off in the warmth of the fall air. His father had laughed when it came out of the pit oven, said it looked like a crime scene. Erin had threatened to just buy one next time. And yet, someone had taken this photo, someone who still had access to it, someone who had either been in the house or recreated it, or worse, never left it behind. He didn't sleep that night. At 4:11 a.m., he sat bolt upright, unable to shake the memory that the family camera had vanished the same night his parents did. The old Polaroid, the one his mother had used religiously, even when film prices were ridiculous. She kept every photo labeled and stored in albums, dated by season. This photo had never been printed. So who developed it? He grabbed his keys and left the hotel without a second thought. Lieutenant Canby was already at the site by the time he arrived, flanked by 2 detectives and a forensic tech hunched over a folding laptop under floodlights. The air was wet and cold, the kind of fog that settled on your skin and never left. "I know it's early," Ben said, stepping under the edge of the tent. "But I need to see the journal. Just the cover." Canby blinked at him, surprised, but then nodded once. She reached into a labeled evidence crate and carefully removed a sealed bag. Inside was a cloth-covered book, pale green with a faded gold stripe down the spine. The corners were worn. A single name was pressed into the front cover in blocky black ink. Erin Teller. Ben swallowed. He'd seen that notebook before. Not recently. Not since childhood. But he remembered the sound of the pages when she flipped through it, the way she tapped the spine with her pen when thinking. It had been a gift from his father on their 7th anniversary. She used it to write everything, grocery lists, thoughts, even sketch diagrams from crime scenes she wasn't supposed to discuss. "My mother carried that with her every day," he said quietly. "If this notebook is real, then she was alive, for at least some time after they vanished." Canby's voice was soft. "We're having the ink dated now, but preliminary analysis suggests the last entry was written around 2007. Ben's legs weakened again, and he grabbed the edge of the table for support. 14 years, he whispered. She lived 14 years after that night. Possibly longer, possibly less. But the dates match what's legible so far. There are multiple entries, some in shorthand, some in longhand, some in a rushed scrawl. It's difficult to read. What do they say? Canby hesitated. We're still decoding it, Ben. But one page says, Day 143. He won't let me see Mark, but he lets the boy visit now. He says we're safer down here than out there. I don't believe him anymore. Ben turned away, his stomach churning. The boy. That wasn't him. It couldn't be. So who was she writing about? Later that morning, Ben returned to County Road 19. The fog had thinned, but the air still held that heavy silence that had never left him. The turnout where the cruiser had been found was overgrown with scrub and grass, the tire ruts long faded. But he knew exactly where it had been parked. Angled just off the shoulder, facing east, one back door open, the radio hissing static. He crouched at the spot where they'd found him sleeping 31 years ago. He imagined the warmth of the blanket, the distant click of pine branches, and the sound of a voice, his father's, telling him they'd be right back. But they hadn't come back, and now he knew. Maybe they never could. He rose slowly and turned to face the trees across the road. If someone had been standing there that night, watching from the woods, they'd have had a clear view of the cruiser, of the boy inside, and of the direction Mark and Erin had gone. Ben walked across the road, the gravel crunching under his shoes. He stepped over the ditch and into the brush, ducking low-hanging branches as he made his way deeper into the tree line. About 200 yards in, he saw it. A path, faint but there, cut into the trees at a subtle angle, the kind of track someone would use over and over if they didn't want to be seen. It led down slope, then hooked sharply to the right, where a low barbed fence ran between two trees. Most of the wire had rusted through. On the far side, the path continued. Ben didn't hesitate. He crossed. 10 minutes later, he found what looked like the remains of a hunting blind, collapsed and overgrown, with pieces of black tarp half buried under needles and moss. He took a photo of it with his phone and made a mental note to show it to Canby. But it was what lay beneath the tarp that made him stop cold. A canteen, old, military issue. Etched into the bottom, barely visible under the grime, were the initials, MT. He didn't touch it. Instead, he stepped back and dialed the number Canby had given him. "Lieutenant, I found something. I think you'd better send a unit." Her tone shifted immediately. "Where are you?" "East of County Road 19. There's an overgrown path through the trees. Crosses an old fence line. About 15 minutes in, there's what's left of a blind. And a canteen with my father's initials on it." "Do not touch anything," Canby said firmly. "Stay there. I'm on my way." Ben lowered the phone and looked around. The forest was still. Quiet. But he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone out here. That something, or someone, had once stood in this exact spot, night after night, watching the cruiser from the woods, waiting. And maybe, just maybe, they never left. Lieutenant Canby arrived less than 30 minutes after Ben's call. 2 additional patrol units followed, one with a forensics tech who immediately began photographing the canteen and surrounding area. Ben stood back, arms crossed tightly against his chest, his mind replaying every possible version of how his father's belongings could have ended up here, just beyond view of where the cruiser had been parked all those years ago. Canby ducked beneath the low-hanging limbs and approached the blind. Her eyes scanned the ground, the overgrowth, the fence line. "This was hidden well," she said quietly, crouching beside the canteen. "Too well for just hunters. Nobody stashes old gear like this unless they're watching something or someone." "It was set up to surveil the road," Ben said. "You can see a clean line of sight through the break in the trees. If someone was here in 1993, they could have watched the cruiser without ever being seen." Canby looked up at him. "And now we know your parents might have never left the area." Ben's stomach turned. The idea that they'd been kept nearby, that whatever happened that night happened here, within the same woods he used to play in as a kid, made his skin crawl. The tech retrieved the canteen using tongs and slid it into a fresh evidence bag. As they worked, one of the deputies returned from the ridge above. "Found another trail," she called. "Looks like it leads west, toward the back of the property that used to be leased by the state. There's a clearing with a shed. Looks newer than the blind." Canby stood. "We'll check it. Ben, I need you to wait here with Officer Langston. I'll radio if we find anything." He nodded, but something inside him clenched. I want to come. Canby paused. This isn't just personal for you, it's raw. That makes things complicated. You see something we don't, you might jump to conclusions. I'm not asking to process evidence, Ben said. I need to know what's out here. She studied him for a moment longer, then nodded. Stay close. Don't touch anything. The trail narrowed to a single deer path, the kind barely visible unless you were looking for it. Roots coiled across the ground like old ropes, and the canopy overhead darkened the forest into near twilight despite the rising sun. Ben stayed just behind Canby as they moved carefully through the underbrush. Then the trees parted, and there it was. A corrugated steel shed, maybe 10 by 12 feet, tucked against the slope of the hill like it had always been there. The siding was streaked with rust, the padlock on the door fresh. Too fresh. One of the officers raised his weapon. Canby stepped forward slowly, hand on her own sidearm. We're going in. She gave the nod, and the bolt cutters came out. The lock snapped with a sharp crack. Inside, it was dark, until the flashlight beams cut through. There was no electricity, no insulation. Just a poured concrete floor, a wooden table, and shelves lined with faded cardboard boxes and mason jars. But what stopped Ben in his tracks was what hung on the back wall. A single corkboard, warped with moisture, covered in photographs. All of them taken from a distance. Some recent, some decades old. But they all had one thing in common. They were photographs of him. Ben as a teenager, biking near his grandmother's house. Ben in college, standing outside a dorm. Ben from 3 years ago, walking out of a courthouse. All taken without his knowledge. He felt the blood drain from his face. Canby moved beside him, her expression grim. This wasn't just about your parents, she said. Someone's been following you. For a very long time. Ben backed away from the board slowly, trying to keep the panic from taking over. His eyes caught something else, tucked into the corner of the shelf, nearly buried behind a row of labeled film canisters. A photo album. He pulled it out carefully, his gloves on now, just like they'd instructed him earlier. The cover was cracked leather, the edges fraying. Inside were photos from the early 90s. The same wallpaper, the same cake, the same birthday party from the Polaroid. But there were others, unfamiliar ones. A girl with straight dark hair standing beside Erin in what looked like a basement. A narrow bed in the corner, a man's shadow just out of frame. More pages, more children. Children who weren't Ben. Ben turned to Canby, his voice tight. This wasn't just about surveillance. Someone kept them, maybe even kept others. Canby flipped through the pages beside him, each one heavier than the last. At the back of the album, a note had been taped to the inside cover in childlike handwriting. The man in the mask says we're not allowed to leave yet, but one day, Mommy said the door will open. Ben closed the book gently. His father's badge, his mother's journal. And now, a photo album hidden in the woods filled with pictures of people he didn't know, but someone had made sure he never saw them, until now. Back at the station that afternoon, Canby called in the federal task force. The shelter, the shed, the photos, the album, the journal. It had grown too large, too strange. Ben sat quietly in the conference room, the blinds drawn, the photo of himself at age 6 still on the table in front of him. He hadn't moved it since the morning. Couldn't bring himself to. A knock came at the door. Canby entered, her coat still streaked with dust. We've confirmed something else, she said. Fingerprint analysis on the badge came back. Ben sat up straighter. There's a partial match. The print on the rim wasn't your father's. It belongs to someone else, someone who's in the system. Ben's voice was a whisper. Who? Canby's face tightened. A man named Curtis Lyle, former county employee, Civil Defense Maintenance Division, went off-grid in 2002. He was never a suspect in your parents' case. But he should have been. Ben stood. Where is he now? Canby exhaled. That's the problem. We don't know. Last known address was 40 miles east, but his trail went cold almost 20 years ago. Ben turned slowly back to the Polaroid on the table. He looked at his own expression, half smiling, half blinking, forever frozen in time. Somewhere out there, someone had kept this moment, preserved it, watched it, and waited. Curtis Lyle's personnel file was thin, a few faded pages, black and white ID photo from 1981, notes about basic maintenance duties and an early retirement request dated May 1993, 5 months before Mark and Erin Teller vanished. The signature on that retirement form was crooked, as if written in a hurry. No forwarding address, no exit interview. Just a box checked medical reasons, and a stamped line that read, "Released to civilian status." Ben stared at the file from across the briefing table. He worked for the Civil Defense Division when the fallout shelters were still on the books, Canby explained, flipping through a map of decommissioned facilities. He had keys, access codes. He knew which ones weren't filled in or sealed off. Most were supposed to be disabled after the Cold War ended, but paperwork like this? She gestured to the map. It's full of holes. Ben rubbed his temples, and no one thought to look into him before. Back then, he wasn't flagged. He'd already retired before your parents vanished. He lived alone, didn't have a criminal record, just faded. And now his fingerprint shows up on my father's badge. Canby nodded grimly. We're digging into utility records, land deeds, anything that might show where he went after 93. But if he was smart, and he clearly was, he could have stayed off-grid for decades. Ben leaned back in the chair, his jaw clenched. The thought that this man, this unknown civil servant, might have been the last person to see his parents alive burned a hole straight through him. "What about the other children in the album?" he asked. "We're cross-referencing faces with missing persons reports," Canby said. "Some are too blurred, others might have been altered. But we've got 2 facial recognition hits already. Both were reported missing from Oregon between 1990 and 1995, so it wasn't just my family." "No," she said quietly. "It wasn't." That night, Ben stood outside his childhood home. The house had been rented out over the years, changed hands twice, but the bones were still the same. The porch light flickered. The same cedar tree leaned over the driveway, limbs too low and thick for trimming. He had asked the current tenant, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a distant memory of the case, for 10 minutes alone inside. "Of course," she had said, pressing the key into his hand. "Take your time." The floor creaked the same way it used to. The walls had been painted over, but the scent of old pine wood still lived in the frame of the house. He stepped through the hallway, past the spot where his mother's frame degrees had once hung, into the kitchen, the counter where the birthday cake had sat, the angle where the Polaroid had been taken. He stood in the exact spot from the photograph and looked out across the room. There was the drawer where she kept the camera, the cupboard where his father had stored the emergency flashlight, the corner of the table where Ben used to sit and swing his legs beneath the chair, pretending to be a detective just like his mom. His eyes burned. It was all still here, and yet none of it was. He opened the drawer. Empty. Nothing but a cracked measuring tape and a broken corkscrew. The camera was long gone, but as he knelt down to close it, he noticed something at the very back, wedged behind the drawer's track. A roll of film, still sealed, old Kodak Gold, 24 exposures, labeled in his mother's handwriting, October for Mark. Ben felt the blood rush to his ears. It was hers, undeveloped, untouched. He turned it over in his hands. The packaging was faded but intact. No signs of tampering. She must have hidden it, or forgotten it. He slid it into his coat pocket with shaking fingers and locked the door behind him. Back in town, he found an old camera shop on 8th and Alder, tucked between a pawn shop and a vape store. The sign read Allie's Camera and Memories, its neon letters flickering in a soft pink glow. Inside, the air smelled like chemical toner and dust. It was perfect. The man behind the counter looked to be in his 60s, bald except for 2 tufts of white hair that stuck out like wings. "You're lucky," he said, peering at the roll Ben handed over. "They stopped making this stock in '04, but I've still got a few chemicals that'll treat it gentle." "Can you do it today?" The man scratched his chin. "I'll need a few hours. If it's been stored right, you'll get something. If not," he trailed off. "Film can die quiet, you know." Ben nodded. "Just do your best." He left his number, thanked the man, and stepped back into the misty street. At 6:52 p.m., his phone rang. "You might want to come see this in person," the man said. Ben was back at the shop in 5 minutes. The prints were still drying on the rack. 24 photos, some faded to orange, others murky, but a few, just a few, were sharp, crisp, haunting. His mother, in uniform, standing in the backyard with Mark, both in their patrol gear, laughing, a rare moment caught in stillness. Another frame, Erin at her desk, late night, hunched over a map. Then the interior of the cruiser, the back seat, the blanket, the sleeping boy, him, captured from outside the open door. And finally, one photo that stopped Ben cold. A man's face, only partially captured, like he'd been moving too fast, but clearly visible. Thin, mid-40s, receding hairline, glasses, and those eyes, even blurred, they felt wrong. Not dazed, not caught by surprise, looking straight at the camera, smiling. Ben turned to the shop owner. "You didn't crop these?" The man shook his head. "Printed as is." Ben pulled out his phone and snapped a shot of the image. "I need to show this to the sheriff's office now." By the time Canby reviewed the image, facial recognition was already in process. The man in the photograph, though never arrested, had been flagged in a state psych facility's visitor logs back in 2005, using an alias. The records showed he had visited a patient named Curtis Lyle twice under the name Garrett Shane. Alias confirmed. Same man. "His name's not Shane," Canby said. "His real name is Garrett Lewis Karnes. He changed it in 1992. Multiple identity thefts, no arrests, no fingerprints on file. But that's him. And he was watching my family," Ben said. "Taking photos, maybe even inside our house. He's tied to Lyle. That makes him central. And if he's still out there..." "We need to find him," Ben said. "Now." Canby looked up from the screen. "We will. The net's tightening." But Ben wasn't so sure. If Garrett Karnes had stayed hidden this long, through badge drops, photo trails, sealed shelters, and buried film, he wasn't just a ghost. He was a hunter. And Ben had just stepped into his sights. The photo went up on the task force board the next morning. Center slot. Highlighted edges. Garrett Lewis Karnes in bold red across the top. Beneath his name, 3 known addresses, 6 aliases, and 1 line that sent a chill through the entire room. Visitor, Curtis Lyle. Tillamook Mental Health Facility, March 2005. He never used his real name, Canby said as she addressed the room. But Karnes visited Lyle twice, both times unannounced, no listed reason. He used an outdated access badge and a forged ID. Facility staff didn't flag it until years later during a compliance audit. "What was Lyle in for?" someone asked. Canby flipped to the next slide. Acute paranoia. Believed people were watching him, listening through the walls. He accused someone of keeping him underground for weeks at a time, claimed he'd worked on black sites for the government. No proof, no charges. But in 2006, he vanished from the halfway house he was placed in. Never seen again. Ben sat near the back, arms folded, his jaw clenched. "Lyle was a puppet," he muttered. "And Karnes was holding the strings." Canby didn't disagree. "We believe Karnes may have used Lyle's connections with civil defense to gain access to sites across Tillamook County, possibly retrofitting one of the fallout shelters for captivity. And if he was behind the disappearances, someone else added, then this goes beyond your parents. He could have been active for years. Ben spoke again, his voice low. He took my mother, my father, maybe others, and he watched me grow up. Everyone in the room turned silent. Canby nodded once. Then it's time we turn the cameras on him. Ben returned to the shed that afternoon, against Canby's recommendation, but he needed to stand there again, alone. The corkboard had been cleared, dusted, documented, removed. The shelf was empty, the album now sealed in evidence, but the space still pulsed with memory, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. He ran a flashlight across the floor, watching for signs he may have missed. A scratch in the concrete, a boot print near the door. But what he found instead was a metal hatch beneath a warped floorboard, barely visible unless you were looking for it. His pulse jumped. The latch creaked when he pulled. Below, a narrow shaft of stairs leading into darkness. Ben hesitated, heart pounding, then slowly descended. The air was cold. The narrow tunnel reeked of mildew and wet cement. His flashlight beam slid across the walls, cement-lined, reinforced with steel bracing. No signs of recent use. But halfway down, he noticed a faint scrawl etched into the wall with a nail or the key. He says we'll be part of the new family. Ben exhaled shakily. He pressed forward, reaching a locked door at the end. Steel, no handle. Just a sliding viewport bolted shut from the other side. It was a cell, or a hiding place, or both. He backed out slowly, careful not to disturb anything, and called Canby the second he reached daylight. They arrived in full. Forensics, FBI liaison, engineers. The space was processed over the next 72 hours. Hidden wiring, moldy bedding, stained clothing fragments, one small wooden chair chained to the floor, and in the corner, something that made Ben's stomach drop. A child's drawing, crayon, faded. It showed a small square room, one window, one door, stick figures, a woman with long black hair holding hands with a boy. Beside them, a tall figure with black marks across the face. Ben stared at it for a long time. It wasn't him. It was someone else. Another boy. They brought in a sketch expert. Then a retired psych nurse who had worked at Tillamook Mental Health in the early 2000s. She studied the drawing for almost 10 minutes before speaking. "This is Karnes," she said. "I'd bet my license on it." "You treated him?" "Number. But we got calls from law enforcement about him years ago. He was suspected of squatting inside decommissioned structures, old rail cars, factory crawl spaces. Always one step ahead. Paranoid, charismatic, a manipulator." "Was he ever institutionalized?" Ben asked. "No," she said, "because he was too careful. Never violent in public, always played the part, but behind closed doors." She trailed off. "What?" "He was obsessed with isolation. He believed modern society had ruined children, called it contamination of innocence. He believed the only way to restore the world was to raise a new generation underground. No interference, no contact with the outside." Ben's chest tightened. He remembered the journal. "He won't let me see Mark, but he lets the boy visit now." It wasn't a delusion. It was happening. The next lead came by accident. An archivist at the State Historical Records Office, an intern named Emma, called in after finding something in a box of unfiled land use records from 1991. It was a rural land purchase just west of Nehalem Bay State Park. Buyer, G.L. Karnes. But what made it matter was what wasn't in the file. The land had no home, no utilities, no county inspection follow-ups. It was listed as recreation use only. No building permits, no records of visitors. But satellite imaging from 2006 showed a structure there, a small one. By 2009, it had vanished from aerial imagery. intentionally blurred or hidden by planted trees. The FBI approved a search. Canby looked at Ben. "You want to come?" He didn't hesitate. They reached the edge of the property at dusk. No roads, only forest. The search team fanned out. Ben followed behind the agents, his flashlight beam slicing through the trees. Then someone called out. "Found something." A structure. Small, bunker style. Buried mostly underground, overgrown, covered in moss and leaf fall. The door was welded shut. Inside, they heard nothing. But when they breached it an hour later, what they found was worse than expected. It was empty, long since cleared out. But the walls were painted, not graffiti, not tags, just words, in black ink, over and over, hundreds of times. "We are the saved." She never learned. He was the first, she was the last. And in the center of the floor, scrawled in red, "He's not your father." Ben's knees gave out. He stared at the message until the room swam. The others moved around him, photographed, bagged samples. But Ben sat there, still, because something else had begun to creep in. A thought he had pushed down for 31 years. What if the man who raised him, the one who kissed his forehead that night and whispered, "We'll be right back," wasn't his real father? What if that man was Karnes? And what if the real Mark Teller never made it out of that shelter? Ben didn't speak for the rest of the night. Not in the SUV ride back from the forest. Not when Canby tried to ask if he was okay. Not when the task force gathered in the incident room and started pinning new lines of red string between Karnes, the shelters, the children, and the buried badge. He just sat, staring at the printout of the bunker wall. "He's not your father." At 2:13 a.m., he drove to a clinic on the edge of town. Not for answers, exactly, just a truth he could hold in his hands. The technician looked confused when he explained what he wanted. "You want a rapid DNA test?" Ben nodded. "And you want it compared to who?" He hesitated. "I need you to run it against the archived DNA of Mark Teller." "My father. There's a law enforcement file. I'll send the request code." The tech blinked. "You're not sure he was your father?" Ben's voice was a whisper. "I need to know if the man who disappeared in 1993 was blood to me, or if I was planted in that cruiser." The tech didn't say anything else, just nodded, printed the form, and handed him the swab. He couldn't sleep while he waited. Not the next night, not the one after. The thought sat with him, gnawed at the edges of everything he remembered. Every bedtime story, every photo, every sound his father had ever made. Was it all an act? A mask? Or had Karnes taken them, killed Mark, and stepped into the role, just long enough to stage the drop-off? He remembered the feeling of waking up in that cruiser, warm, safe. The sound of static on the radio. No screaming, no signs of struggle. Just stillness, like he'd been placed there, tucked in, left as a message. And if Karnes had watched him grow up, what had he been waiting for? The results came in 2 days later. He was sitting in the park across from the station, hands wrapped around a coffee that had long gone cold, when his phone rang. It was the technician. Ben answered and didn't say a word. There was a pause on the other end. Then, "The sample doesn't match. The man listed in the file as Mark Teller is not your biological father." Ben closed his eyes. No reaction, no shock. Just a slow, strange exhale. A truth that had already taken root before it arrived. "Thank you," he said. He ended the call, and in that moment, a silence settled over him. Not the silence of grief, but something heavier. Inheritance shattered, history rewritten. He wasn't the deputy's son. He was a child left behind in a running car, by someone who wanted him found, or spared, or used. Later that night, Canby pulled into the station lot and saw him sitting alone in the far corner of the garage, the red Cadillac door from the junkyard open beside him, one hand resting on the frame like he was listening to it. She approached quietly. "You okay?" He didn't look up. I used to remember his voice. I'd hear it in dreams. "Ben, come on inside. Shoes off. Mom's making chili." He paused. Now I can't remember what it sounded like. Not really. Just the feeling of it. Canby crouched beside him. "I'm sorry," she said. He nodded. I think someone tried to raise me right. But it wasn't him. Not the man I thought. And now, I don't know who I am." She placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're the one who's still here," she said. "And whoever left you in that cruiser, whatever they were trying to do, it didn't work. You're not him. You're not Karnes. You're not part of his plan." Ben turned, eyes red. But what was his plan? Canby hesitated. Maybe he was trying to prove something, build something, or just destroy a family one layer at a time. We don't know. Not yet. Ben exhaled hard. Then let's find out. The next day brought a break. An FBI analyst identified a bank account tied to Garrett Karnes under yet another alias, Eric D. Lowen. The account had recent activity. A wire transfer from a shell company based out of northern Washington. Small amounts, quarterly deposits, but the withdrawal point was local. A gas station ATM in Nehalem. Security footage showed a hooded man, mid-50s, lean, gaunt, wearing mirrored sunglasses and gloves. He withdrew $40 and walked off camera. It was dated just 12 days ago. He was still out there, still moving, still watching. Ben studied the footage a dozen times. That gait, that posture. There was something familiar about it. Something in the tilt of the head, the slope of the shoulders. Then it hit him. The old VHS tape. He raced to the station archive, pulled the digitized version of an old Teller family home movie. Halloween, 1991. Erin had filmed it. Mark was outside, raking leaves. Ben, age 4, dressed like a firefighter, stumbling through the yard. And in the background, by the road, just for a second, a man walking past, mirrored sunglasses, same slope to the shoulders, same tilt of the head. He'd been watching them even then. By the weekend, they had a new plan. Stake out the withdrawal point, monitor nearby properties. Canby ordered aerial sweeps over parcels linked to Karnes' shell companies. They searched for ground disturbances, recent construction, hidden entrances. Nothing immediate, until a ranger near the eastern border of Nehalem State Park found something unusual. A shallow depression in a pine grove, 30 feet wide, ringed with stones, too symmetrical to be natural. A ground team investigated. Beneath 3 feet of soil, they struck metal. A hatch, bolted from the inside. Ben stood near the edge of the opening as the welders worked, each hiss of acetylene torch bringing him closer to the final truth. When the hatch groaned open, the smell hit first. Earth, rust, and something older. They climbed down with flashlights and masks. What they found stopped them all. A hallway, cement walls, scratches in the paint, a generator still faintly humming, and 6 rooms, 5 of them empty, but in the 6th, a cot, a chair, a desk, and a woman, alive. Eyes wide, sunken cheeks, pale as paper. She didn't scream, didn't move, just blinked slowly. Ben dropped to his knees. His voice broke. "Mom?" The moment held. Frozen in silence. Ben on his knees. Erin Teller, alive, watching him from inside that narrow concrete cell like she couldn't tell if he was real or another hallucination. She looked older, yes, but not 31 years older. Her skin was drawn, her frame slight, her hair silvered. But there was something intact in her gaze. Recognition. "Ben," she whispered, voice cracking like dry leaves. He nodded, eyes wet. "It's me." She blinked hard, twice. Her eyes darted to the flashlight in his hand, then to the uniformed agents behind him, and then back to his face. "Don't let them shut the door," she said, and collapsed. They medevaced her out by dawn. Severe malnutrition, vitamin deficiency, old scarring on the wrists and ankles, consistent with prolonged restraint. The ER nurses whispered as they worked, but the silence around her was deeper than anything they could express. She had survived something inhuman, yet her mind was still intact. Ben sat beside her in the ICU, dressed in scrubs, his visitor badge hanging off a clip. He held her hand gently, like it was a relic. She hadn't woken again, but her grip never loosened. He watched the heart monitor rise and fall, counted each inhale, listened for signs of sleep, of pain, of fear. But what he kept turning over in his head, again and again, was the final thing she had said: "Don't let them shut the door. The door, not a door, not this door. The door." What door? And then the question he didn't want to ask. Had she watched the others go through it? By noon she was stable. At 1:04 p.m., she opened her eyes again. Ben was there. She turned to him slowly, spoke in a hoarse whisper. "Did they find your father?" Ben's throat tightened. "No," he said gently. "We found his badge, and we think we know who did this." Her eyes filled with tears. "He's still out there." Ben nodded. "We know. We're going to find him, but I need to know everything. Please." She closed her eyes. For a long time, she said nothing. Then, "I was drugged. Mark too." He figured it out too late. Figured what out? "Garrett," she whispered. He was already inside, working for the county, posing as a delivery driver, sometimes a clerk. Showed up at a training seminar once. I thought he was just some guy. But he'd been watching us for months. Ben stayed quiet. "He wanted a family," she continued, "but one he could control. One he could build right. Said the world had failed children. That people like us, Mark and me, we were contaminated. But he said you could be different, if raised the right way." Ben's voice cracked. "He left me in the cruiser. He told me he had to, that the sheriff's office was already too close, that if you stayed with us, you'd grow up broken like everyone else." She turned her head toward Ben, her voice trembling. "He took me underground, said he needed to finish the plan. He showed me other children, some already gone, said they didn't pass the test, but you were special." Ben's hands curled into fists. "He wanted to raise me." Erin nodded slowly. "He wanted to replace your father, be your new one, and when you got older, come back for you." Ben felt sick. "Did he ever say what the test was?" Her face broke. "He wanted to see if you'd come looking." Later that evening, Ben stood outside her hospital room, the weight of the truth threatening to crush him. Garrett Karnes had been orchestrating this for decades. Not just a kidnapping, not just a disappearance, but a rehearsal for something bigger. And Ben had always been part of the script. A planted child, a controlled survival, a test. That night, Canby walked into the war room holding a new file. "DNA came back," she said. Ben looked up. "The woman we found is not Erin Teller." Silence. "What?" he whispered. "She matches a different profile. Missing person from 1992. Name was Rachel Mendez. Disappeared from a highway rest stop. Never linked to your case." Ben stared blankly. "But she knew my name." "She did," Canby said, "because someone taught her to." Ben sat down hard. "She thought she was your mother, or maybe she was made to think she was." His hands shook. "What about the journal? The drawing? The message on the wall?" "He's not your father?" Canby knelt beside him. "We think it's all part of the same sickness. Karnes built an entire world down there, a script, a family, and now it's unraveling." Ben couldn't speak, because in that moment, one truth became clear. Whoever that woman was, whatever her real name, she believed she was Erin, which meant someone had fed her that belief over years, and the only person who could have done that was the man who still hadn't been found. That night, as rain tapped softly on the hospital windows, The woman calling herself Erin Teller sat up in bed. Her eyes locked onto the corner of the room. The shadows didn't move, but she spoke anyway. "He's going to come back," she whispered. "He always comes back." Ben didn't go home that night. Instead, he sat in the sheriff's office conference room. Lights low, dry erase boards scrawled with names and dates and maps, the air thick with exhaustion and disbelief. "She's not my mother," he said again, not to anyone in particular. "But she thought she was. She remembered me." Canby paced slowly, arms crossed, trying to stitch sense from chaos. "We're dealing with someone who doesn't just abduct victims," she said. "He rewrites them, gives them new memories, new identities. Rachel Mendez wasn't just a prisoner. She was groomed to become Erin Teller. And I was supposed to accept it," Ben muttered. "Like a test. If I believed she was my mother, maybe that meant I'd passed." He looked up. "And if I didn't?" Canby didn't answer. She didn't have to. The next morning, the woman in the hospital bed spoke clearly for the first time since her rescue. "My name is Erin Teller," she said. Ben stood beside the glass, listening as a trauma psychiatrist conducted the evaluation. "Can you tell me the name of your husband?" the doctor asked. "Mark," she said without hesitation. "Mark Teller, Deputy, Tillamook County. And your son?" "Ben, Benjamin Elijah Teller, born September 10th, 1987. Ben swallowed hard. That was correct. Exactly correct. "How did you end up in that shelter?" Her expression faltered. "We were taken. After a call came in, report of a stranded vehicle on County Road 19. We responded. We were ambushed." "Do you remember who did it?" "Yes." "Who?" She blinked slowly. "I don't know his name, but I remember the voice. He always made me sing before meals." "Happy family, happy day." Ben stepped away from the glass. "She's lying," he whispered. Canby shook her head. "Not necessarily." "What do you mean?" "She might believe it's all true, and maybe some of it is." Ben turned to her. "Explain." "We pulled all known photos of Erin Teller, family albums, badge ID, social media archives, ran a facial analysis, and the results." She hesitated. "They came back inconclusive." "What?" "The woman in that hospital bed is not a perfect match, but she could be Erin. Bone structure, eye distance, chin shape, all within deviation. But 30 years of isolation, starvation, possible surgery." "Surgery." Canby nodded. "We found faint incision scars under her jawline and near her hairline. He may have modified her. Subtle changes to reinforce the illusion." Ben stared at her. "So what you're saying is, she could be my mother, but she could also be a completely different woman, made into her." "Yes," Canby said. "And until we find him, we won't know why." The next clue came from an unlikely source, the handwriting analyst. He'd been assigned to the shelter wall scrawls, the phrases, the scratched sentences, the red lettering. And he found something no one expected. The writing on the floor, "He's not your father," was done by a left-handed adult male, he said. But the writing on the walls, the repeated phrases, the affirmations, those were made by multiple people. Ben leaned in. Multiple? At least 3, possibly 4, 1 adult, 2 adolescents, 1 child. Different styles? Yes, different pressure patterns, letter formations, stroke angles. Some of them may have been coached, but the distinctions are clear. Ben's blood ran cold. "You're saying there were other kids down there?" The analyst nodded. "Still might be," he added quietly. By week's end, the FBI had reprioritized the search. A dedicated sub-unit, codenamed Chamber, was formed to locate additional hidden sites linked to Karnes. Dozens of former fallout shelters, cold storage units, decommissioned military utility tunnels across the Pacific Northwest. Any of them could have been retrofitted the same way. The case was no longer about one missing couple. It was a network, a behavioral program, a psychological experiment that had spanned decades. And if Karnes was still active, that meant others, children, teenagers, even adults, might still be living inside the lie. Ben returned to the shed one final time, the place where the first breadcrumb had been found, the badge, the journal, the corkboard. Everything had started there. He crouched near the baseboard, his flashlight trailing across the cracks in the foundation. Something shimmered. He reached in and pulled out a cassette tape, unlabeled, wrapped in wax paper, and under it, a note, in a child's handwriting, for Ben. In case he doesn't remember. His hands trembled as he pocketed the tape. Later, in the AV room of the sheriff's office, the tape hissed to life under the reel-to-reel. A child's voice, faint, but unmistakable. "I live underground now, but I think I used to live with a lady named Erin. She said my name was Eli, but the man says that's wrong. He says I was never supposed to be there. He says Ben is the one who gets to leave." The voice paused, then whispered, "He said, I'm the rehearsal." The tape kept playing. The boy's voice drifted through the small speakers, soft, hesitant, recorded in a single take. There were no background sounds, no interruptions, just a child alone with his thoughts. "He says I used to live in the other place, with windows, with sunlight, but I got sick. That's what he tells me. He says I got sick with the outside, and he had to take me underground so I wouldn't die. But I remember Erin. I remember her voice. She sang when she brushed my hair." Ben pressed pause. The room fell into silence. Canby sat across from him, hands folded tightly. "Jesus," she whispered. Ben ran both hands down his face. There was another boy. "Eli," Canby said. "Number, that's what she called him. But Karnes said that wasn't his name." Ben looked at her. "What if Eli wasn't someone else?" Canby frowned. "What do you mean?" Ben rewound the tape slightly and replayed the last line. "But the man says that's wrong. He says I was never supposed to be there. He says Ben is the one who gets to leave." Canby's eyes narrowed. "Wait, are you saying—" Ben nodded. "I think I'm Eli." The theory sent shockwaves through the task force. Every document, every photograph, every video clip from Ben's childhood was pulled and scrutinized. Birth certificate, medical files, preschool enrollment. The more they looked, the more questions emerged. The records were there, but oddly clean. Too clean. No hospital records until age 6. No dental charts before the foster intake physical. No early school photos, no daycare logs, nothing before the cruiser. And now, with the tape in hand, another chilling possibility emerged. What if the boy left in the cruiser wasn't the real Ben Teller? What if his name had always been Eli? A test subject, a backup, a twin. Canby brought in a forensic identity specialist. They matched known childhood photos of Ben Teller, the real one, to the man standing before them now. The results? Inconclusive. Too much time. Too much degradation of early photo resolution. Too many missing variables. But the possibility couldn't be ignored. The woman who believed she was Erin Teller might have been forced into that identity. But the boy who became Ben Teller, he might have been constructed too. Ben stared at his own baby photo. Eyes wide, cheeks full, grinning in a fireman's costume. "I don't know who I am," he whispered. Canby placed a hand on his shoulder. "You know who you've become. That's what matters now." The search for Karnes intensified. FBI analysts traced a vehicle registered to one of his old aliases, Rex B. Cowell, purchased just 2 years ago under a farm supply company in Washington. The car had been ticketed 6 months earlier outside a self-storage facility in Aberdeen. Agents rushed there. Inside the unit, tarps, canned goods, stacks of VHS tapes, dozens of notebooks, and in the center, on a folding table beneath a single bare bulb, a corkboard, Photos, maps, surveillance shots, and in the middle, a Polaroid. Ben, at age 6, asleep in the cruiser, taped beside it, a torn corner from a missing child poster. The name, Eli Branson, age 6, disappeared, August 1993, Portland, Oregon. He was a ward of the state. No known parents. Foster home burned down. Case unsolved. Ben stared at the name. "I think that's me," he said. Canby didn't argue. "What does that mean for everything we thought we knew?" she asked quietly. Ben looked at her. "It means my mother might still be out there." That night they played more tapes from the storage unit. Some were incoherent. Children singing, prayers recited, interviews, role plays, happy family scenarios. But one tape stood out. An adult male voice, clear, instructive, eerily calm. "This is day 304. Subject Eli shows stronger resistance than subject Ben. Erin remains compliant. Mark is no longer with us. Reinforcement of roles is proceeding. Goal, emotional transference complete by day 365. Canby paused the tape. Mark is no longer with us," she repeated. "That means he killed him." Ben nodded slowly and tried to replace him. They brought in trauma experts, psychologists, cult deprogrammers. Everyone agreed on one thing. Karnes wasn't just abducting people, he was rebuilding them. Ben sat with the tapes for hours. In one of them, a woman's voice read bedtime stories. In another, a boy sobbed while reciting a pledge. "I am part of the family. I am clean. I am wanted. The outside is wrong. The inside is home." And over it all, Karnes' voice, smooth, cold. "Repeat until they believe it, then reward, then reshape." Ben stared at the recorder, his heart hammering. What had he survived? What else had he forgotten? They moved Rachel Mendez, the woman still identifying as Erin Teller, to a secure psychological care facility under round-the-clock observation. But when Ben visited her the following morning, something had changed. She was sitting up, calm, smiling faintly. "You know," she said, "I used to think I was someone else, but now I remember." Ben's breath caught. "Remember what?" She reached out and touched his hand gently. "You used to draw elephants, on the floor, with a little red crayon." His knees almost gave out. He remembered that, but no one should have, unless... He leaned in. "Who am I?" She didn't blink. "You're my son." Ben pulled away. "No," he whispered. "You're not my mother." She tilted her head, then said softly, "Then why are we the same?" The next morning, Ben woke before dawn. He hadn't slept much, just brief fits of unconsciousness on the break room cot, his mind spiraling between images of the boy named Eli, the voice on the tape, and the woman who called herself Erin. Outside, the sky was just beginning to lighten, blue-gray and indifferent. He rose, showered, and drove to the storage unit himself, alone. Inside, the stale air clung to him like dust. The overhead bulb buzzed. He turned the recorder back on and played one of the final tapes. This one marked simply, "Exit Strategy." Karnes' voice filled the space, steady and devoid of emotion. "If you're hearing this, it means subject Ben has not returned home or has begun to question the design. That is expected. Doubt is part of the trajectory. But know this, you are where you are supposed to be. The others were preparation, the chamber is the seed. And Ben, my Ben, is the proof." Ben hit stop. My Ben. He stared at the speaker. It wasn't just a project. It was a delusion. Karnes didn't want to raise a family. He wanted to manufacture one. Control every variable, replace love with programming, loyalty with obedience. And he had failed. But only halfway. That afternoon, the FBI flagged a new lead. A woman in Spokane, Washington, had just filed a report after recognizing a man outside her child's school. He hadn't spoken, just stood behind a fence, watching. She thought he was a teacher, until she saw a flyer later that night. Karnes' photo, aged-up composite. She'd seen him before, too, in 1994, when she was a child. She claimed he once showed up at her home claiming to be from Child Safety Services. Her parents let him in. He asked strange questions, took notes, left without taking anything. But a week later, her older brother went missing on the way to the bus stop. Case unsolved. The FBI scrambled a team. The address was quiet, suburban, middle class. An abandoned property sat 2 blocks away, foreclosed last year. Still owned by a shell company. Surveillance picked up motion 2 hours later. A man, early 60s, lean build, gloves, hood up, moving methodically through the backyard. They surrounded the house by nightfall. Ben arrived just as they moved in. The door creaked open. Inside, plastic sheeting, medical supplies, stacks of journals, another corkboard. Ben stepped into the hallway, flashlight trembling in his grip. In the living room, something glinted beneath a tarp. A metal box. He knelt, peeled it open. Inside, 5 VHS tapes, a child's hospital bracelet, a photo of Erin Teller holding a newborn, and a handwritten note. To Ben, "I told you I'd always be nearby. You just had to open the right door." A voice called out from the other room. "Back room's clear. Wait, we've got a trap door." Ben ran. The trap door was cut into the closet floor. Fresh wood, clean hinges. They opened it slowly. A narrow tunnel led downward, concrete walls. Ben descended first, flashlight carving shadows through the dark. 10 feet in, another door, no handle, just a number painted across it in red. 11. He froze. Canby came up behind him. "What is it?" Ben turned to her. "There were 12. 12 what?" He swallowed. 12 subjects. The journal in the shelter said I was 11. She stared at the number on the door. "So this one was yours." He nodded once, hard, and pushed the door open. The room was empty. Just a mattress, a desk, and a small mirror mounted to the wall. Ben stepped inside slowly. Everything in the room was scaled down, to a child's size, and in the corner, sitting on a shelf, was a stuffed elephant, faded, threadbare. Ben picked it up, held it in both hands. He remembered the ear, the stitch through the trunk. He had carried it with him until he was 6, until the night he was left in the cruiser. This room was his. He turned to the mirror and froze. Behind his reflection, painted faintly in chalk on the wall, was a phrase, "If you remember, then he's already coming." Ben stepped back. "What the hell?" Canby entered the room, looked around, then saw the chalk. She reached out and touched it, smudged slightly. "Fresh," she said, which meant whoever wrote it had been there recently. They cleared the rest of the property. No Karnes, but signs of recent use were everywhere. Food wrappers, water jugs, notebook pages with diagrams of what looked like new shelters, locations marked across Oregon, Idaho, even Utah. The project hadn't ended. It had evolved. And Ben, he wasn't the conclusion. He was just proof of concept. Later that night, Ben returned to his motel. He sat on the bed, the stuffed elephant beside him. He stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror for a long time, then took out the old hospital bracelet from the metal box. The name was faded. Not Ben, not Eli, just a number. 11. He turned the bracelet over. A date was written in faded ink. July 18th, 1987. It wasn't his birthday. At least, not the one he remembered. Ben didn't sleep. He just stared at the date on the hospital bracelet again and again. July 18th, 1987. Not September 10th. Not the birthday he had celebrated for 31 years. But the one etched into this plastic band. Faded. Real. He finally said it out loud. That's who I was. Before the cruiser. Before the name number 11. Eli, the boy who wasn't meant to leave. The one who somehow did. The task force shifted focus. Karnes hadn't vanished. He was seeding, preparing new sites, expanding the program. Not just replacing families, but building systems, miniature societies, closed environments where children could be reprogrammed, evaluated, controlled. He had already attempted it once. With Erin, with Mark, with Ben. And now, it was happening again. The red dots on the wall map spread like infection. 7 new shelters were identified using matching blueprints and supply shipments. All traced back to the shell corporations Karnes had used for years. 5 were already raided. 2 were empty. 2 had signs of recent exit. But the last one, buried in the forest near the Washington-Idaho border, showed fresh heat signatures. The team mobilized. Ben rode with Canby. No vest, no radio chatter. Just silence and pine trees swallowing the road as they got closer to the site. "You don't have to go down there," she said as they geared up. "I do," Ben answered. "It started with me. I need to see it end." She didn't argue. She knew it wouldn't. Not really. The hatch was buried beneath a fake compost heap. Welded steel, coded lock. But the code wasn't a mystery. Ben keyed in 071887. The lock disengaged with a hiss. Below them, the darkness felt alive. They descended. Room by room, concrete walls, red lights, soundproofed chambers. This shelter was larger than the last. 12 rooms, each labeled with a number. Ben stopped in front of room 12. The door was ajar. Inside, a twin bed. A drawing taped to the wall. A stick-figure family. 2 adults, 1 child. All smiling, standing beneath a red sun. The caption underneath, scrawled in shaky crayon, "I am ready to come out." Canby stepped beside him. "Ben!" But he was already walking. He found room 1 at the end of the hall. Inside, nothing but a single chair. And on it, a cassette recorder. Labeled Final. He pressed play. Karnes' voice returned. Older, slower, but still confident. They said it was madness. That children need chaos to build resilience, but chaos breaks them. What I built was order, harmony, a world free of betrayal, cruelty, failure. A family that obeys, that survives, that remembers its role. The tape clicked. Ben leaned in. "You, 11? You were never meant to pass. You were the failure, the contradiction. But you found your way out anyway. Now I know what I did wrong." Another click. "Next time, there won't be a door." Ben hit stop. His stomach turned. Canby stood frozen beside the corkboard, this one covered in photos. Children, dozens of them, labeled by number, some crossed out, some circled. 1 photo in the center. Ben, age 6, circled 3 times in red ink. Below it, a single word. Unresolved. They didn't find Karnes in the shelter, but he had been there. 2 weeks earlier, according to the timers on the generator logs. He had eaten here, slept here, recorded here, and someone else had too. In the camera logs, a boy appeared, maybe 10 years old. Face thin, eyes hollow, walking from room to room. On one recording, he whispered, "Is it true what he said? That I came from outside? That there was a before?" Ben watched it on loop and felt like he was staring at himself, a generation behind. The cycle was beginning again. That night, Canby sat beside him on the edge of the motel bed. "You did everything you could." Ben shook his head. "He's still out there." "Yes," she said quietly. "But now so are you. And you're not a child anymore." Ben looked at the tape recorder in his hands. He wanted to raise a ghost, a child without memory, without will, just reflexes, obedience. But something slipped through. "What?" Ben stared at her. "Me." It ended where it began. A road, a cruiser, and a boy left waiting. Only this time, the boy was a man, and he wasn't waiting. Ben stood alone on County Road 19, right where the cruiser had been found 3 decades earlier. The shoulder was cracked with weeds now, but the tree line was the same. The air had the same weight. Cold. Still. He closed his eyes and listened to the wind. In his hand, the recorder. The final tape. Not Karnes' words this time, but his own. He hit record. "My name is Benjamin Elijah Teller. Or maybe it isn't. Maybe I was someone else before. A child named Eli. Subject 11, the one who got out. I don't know anymore, and I don't know if it matters. But I remember now. The room. The rules. The drawings. The tests. The voice behind the glass. I remember waking up in a police cruiser, alone. I remember the quiet. The headlights. My name written on a note I couldn't read yet. I remember love, too. It didn't come from him. It came from the ones who tried to save me. My father, my mother, whoever she was, whoever she wasn't. And now I remember enough to say this clearly. This is over. You don't get to run the story anymore." He clicked the tape off and left it on the roadside, beneath a flat stone, for whoever came next. That same night, a ranger patrolling an old fire trail outside Spokane found something unusual. A small camp, empty fire pit, sleeping bag, footprints, and a pile of papers buried beneath moss. Drawings, dozens of them, children, all numbered, and in the center, a crude sketch of a man in a uniform. Labeled, Father. Authorities collected the items, scanned the perimeter. No sign of Karnes. Just his fingerprints on the corner of one page. He was close, but never found. Not yet. In the weeks that followed, the federal task force made dozens of arrests. Associates, enablers, people who had helped Karnes operate in the shadows, storage clerks, property agents, doctors who falsified paperwork. Some claimed they had no idea what they were supporting. Others didn't speak at all. A full report was released. The public called it a tragedy. But for those inside the case, it was something deeper, a fracture in the national psyche. Proof that a single man, acting over decades, had bent reality for innocent children, and almost erased who they were. Ben returned to the forest once more before closing the file. He walked through the shelter again, room by room, touching the walls like scars. Room 11 still held the mirror. He stood before it, looked at himself, and for the first time, didn't flinch. He spoke aloud. "I'm still here." He didn't need Karnes to hear it. He needed himself too. A week later, a letter arrived at the sheriff's department. No return address. Inside, a single photograph. A boy, maybe 8, wearing a shirt with elephants on it, standing beside a man whose face had been burned away with acid or bleach. And on the back, in looping cursive, "Tell 11 his brother made it out too." Ben stared at the photo for a long time, then turned it over again and whispered, 12. October 17th, 2025, location, Tillamook County Sheriff's Office Archive Room. The case file is closed, marked with 3 words in red. Subject unresolved, active threat. But beneath it, Ben's handwritten note remains clipped to the final page. He made a system. I broke it. But somewhere out there, another door is closing, and another child is waiting for someone to open it again. This is for them. This is the warning.